Hello, my friends. We're continuing with our profiles in 2x2s, and today we have a man who was raised in a 2x2s and had a whole plethora of 2x2 experiences, which I think many others have had, but they haven't had them all in a combined fashion like this man has. And that's why it's very important for us to go over this particular case. So, this man was born in the southern part of the United States to two-by-two parents. His mother, she was from the convention grounds. Her parents owned a convention ground. His father was from a divided home, meaning that his his father's mother was a two-by-two, and his father's father was not. And so, when his parents got together, these the mother obviously was highly indoctrinated in the two-by-two system, but the father was not so highly indoctrinated. He had some beliefs and interests and things which were contrary to the two-by-two rules and behaviors. Like he was interested in professional sport. He wanted to listen to or watch the professional sport, football or basketball, or baseball games, things like that, or whatever. He also like enjoyed a little bit of alcohol once in a while, those kind of things. So the reason this is important is because this this father of the man who had married this woman from a convention ground, in order for him to measure up to the expectations of the two-by-two system, he had to run his family like a model two-by-two family. Now, what's a model two-by-two family? It's a family where the children are hyper obedient, meaning that they can sit through hours and hours of two-by-two meetings like a statue, where the children can recite hymns like off the top of their head, as for they are their only interest is talking to two-by-two ministers, that kind of stuff. So this man, his father, he really laid it down hard on his family, and he also had conflict with his wife about certain interests of his own that he had, right? So interests that were residual from his pre 2x2 years. So, anyways, what was the result for the the person that we're interested in, who's the topic of our discussion today? Well, this young little boy grew up in a house that was full of typical 2x2 parent instruction, which is this is what the 2x2 ministers teach them, right? Beat the kids, beat them when they're young as possible, so they're submissive. And that's what happened to this young man. So his earliest memory is him being taken out of 2x2 meeting and beaten with a belt, okay? With a belt and hollering, and then going back into the meeting. And there's a few 2x2 women there weeping because they had to hear his wailings as he was being beaten with belts. Now, this was not a one time affair, this beating, it was a continuous affair. In fact, it was almost every meeting. And the worst meetings, of course, were the union meetings because they ran about 2 hours. And so he was almost guaranteed to get three beatings in those. The father was just a monster with this stuff, but he was basically obeying 2x2 parenting technique that was given by the ministers. The father not only used a belt, but at some point he moved on to customized straps that he had. He had created three custom straps that he kept in different parts of the house and in the vehicles so that he could whip these kids at a moment's notice. And it was awful, awful. And of course, the boy had the other typical parts of a 2x2 upbringing, which is the ostracization and the isolation. So he wasn't allowed to interact really with other kids in the neighborhood. Certainly couldn't go to other kids' homes because they had TVs in those homes. He had some cousins from his father's side who were not 2x2s, and of course, you couldn't have anything to do with those people because they had TVs in their homes. He could only hang out with other 2x2s. And of course, at school, the problems were, even greater. For one thing, his father would ensure that he had a good 2x2 haircut every Saturday, which was a buzz cut, basically make him bald every Saturday. Made him stick out like a sore thumb among the other boys, like a weirdo. Then he wasn't allowed to participate in any sports, of course. The other kids would go or school would take him to see a film. He couldn't participate in that. They would have square dancing, couldn't participate in that. He'd have gym class. He was allowed to participate in gym class, but he didn't want to because he didn't want to wear his gym shorts, and everyone would see all the welts and bruise marks he had all over his legs from all the beatings he was getting from his father. So it was very, very isolating and a real horrible experience. Now, this young man, he had one outlet, that brought sanity into his life, and that was music. He loved music, and so he convinced his parents to let him get piano lessons. Now, of course, they responded by saying, "You can only have piano lessons if you're learning hymns. We want you to learn no other songs but hymns, 2x2 hymns." So he had to take his 2x2 hymn book over to his non-2x2 piano teacher and insist that this is all he could learn, and that's how he had piano lessons. But he would do that just so he could learn some music. And of course, he was learning some other music on the side clandestinely, but he couldn't really play that in his house when any of his family members were around. He also his father bought a car one day, and they went and actually did a test drive with the car. The car had a nice radio in it. When they came to pick up the car for delivery a week later, of course, the radio had been removed and replaced with a blank plate. Okay, so any opportunity to stymie this boy's interest in music, they did it. He was at one point he had enough money that he was able to buy clandestinely, of course, a small pocket transistor radio, and then he would climb up in a tree and turn on his radio and listen to some radio stations' music. And it was his only portal to sanity. His only portal to reality was through this music. I mean, it's thank goodness he had that, because the rest of it was hell. And of course, there were all kinds of, he was getting an inside track into how 2x2ism really worked, because he saw a lot of events. For example, his father would have over one of the 2x2 ministers every once in a while, just one minister, a man, not with his companion, and they would sit up in the evenings drinking whiskey. Other examples: one day they went to Sunday morning meeting, and our young man went out early after the end of the meeting when the elder was out there burning the residual bread, and putting the wine on the ground, and he saw the elder smoking cigarettes. Of course, these are the things that 2x2s do. They're all, liars about they live double lives. And of course, by the way, this elder actually died of lung cancer later on. But yes, he was quickly learning that 2x2s are really just a facade. They look good on the surface, but they're in the background. It's all sorts of other stuff going on. So he continues at school. He gets himself professing at age 12, of course, because that's the age of accountability according to 2x2s. If you after age 12, if you're not professing and you die, you're off to hell. So he's very concerned about that. So he professes, and of course he saw some of his cousins who professed earlier than him. They got great accolades for that, so he does it. It's just an enormous amount of pressure, of course, to profess, and he does it, and he gets baptized 5 years later. That baptism, of course, was in basically a stale water borrow pit. Just really nothing sacramental about it at all. But this is kind of things 2x2s do. So in school, he was interested in music, and so one of the things he needed to do to get some more electives when he was in high school was to take band class. And of course, when the 2x2 ministers found out about this, they came down on him hard and said, you can't do that. You can't be in band class, because next thing we know, you're going to be in a marching band. Of course, that's worldly. So, but he didn't obey them. He continued with his band class. He also had a driver's license as soon as it was possible to get one, and because his family was so tight with the convention ground, his grandparents owned the convention ground, and there's always workers there, and there was overseers there. They sort of started to groom him very early to be a 2x2 minister. And they, in fact, basically made him the chauffeur of the overseer. So he was driving around all the time with the overseer to go and pick up money, and the overseer collecting money. And then the overseer actually was giving the money to his own brother, who was not a 2x2. Very bizarre. But he saw sort of a lot of other inner workings. So, like, for example, they would go to places where there were only male 2x2 ministers, and they would go swimming all buck naked. Or he'd see these 2x2 ministers, males, coming out of the showers in no towel, they just like buck naked, right? So he was obviously, at this time, he's starting to realize, like, this ministry has got some weird things going on with it. In fact, he was taken by the overseer to another 2x2's home, a distance away. I mean, he drove there, and he had to spend the night at this other person's home. And their son, who was a bit older, attempted to molest him when he was sleeping, sexually molest him. He fought him off, of course. But again, this is the kinds of events that are happening and starting to make him, have perhaps a not so innocent view of the 2x2s. But he continues on in it, and he decides he wants to become a pilot. You can start pilot training when you're 16. So he does that, and of course the workers come down hard on that because they tell him that's a worldly profession. But he does it anyway. He gets his pilot's license, and soon he's into looking at girls, and he gets set up. He gets one of these arranged marriages sort of things, arranged relationships, with another 2x2 girl, and of course she decides she wants to become a 2x2 minister, which is what happens to many of these people. They get excited, they're all worked up, and they all think they have a calling. And of course, so then he's out of luck on having a potential spouse. So he has to go. He goes quite a far away, hundreds of miles away, to a convention to try to meet another woman, and he finds one. Ends up having a long distance relationship for a bit, and then they get married. And this woman turns out that she had been molested by her father. Again, this is a 2x2 woman, and that he ended up catching this woman again after being married for about a year and a half. He catches her with another man, right? And so he wants to get rid of her, but he's told by the ministers, if you get remarried, you won't be allowed to participate in 2x2 meetings. So they're already trying to put the screws to him right there. He's got a very problematic wife on his hands, but instead of trying to resolve the issue, the 2x2s are trying to force him to just buckle down and accept it. Right? Of course, he doesn't. He divorces her. And then another woman from a 2x2 family moves into the area, and he starts getting friendly with her, and they start sitting next to each other at the gospel meetings. Well, the 2x2 ministers again approach them and tell them, look, you can't, if you get married, you won't be allowed to participate in the 2x2 meetings. You have to just sit there like lumps of coal, no talking at all, certainly no participation in communion. And but they said, if you want to volunteer for the 2x2 ministry, we'll take you right now. Right? Quite a messed up scenario. So he and this woman get married. This would be his second wife. And of course, everything seems good. She's seems like a great 2x2 woman that comes from a good, prominent family. Everything's great. And they get married, and they don't seem to have intercourse that often. And after about a year and a half, he finds out that she's attracted to women. She's got same-sex attraction, and the whole reason she married him was because she thought he could give her a baby and that she could use him as a beard. In fact, she even tells him, let's just stay together. You can get a girlfriend on the side. Right? So he ends up divorcing her. Now, I would like to point out that you're going to hear many times from 2x2s, they always say, oh, you just need to get a good professing girl or get a good professing boy to get married to. Well, in our particular case here, this man has now had 3 professing girls put in his path, They've all turned out to be duds, right? Two pretty serious duds. So, given that, and they've been lies, it's all these lies going on. In fact, even really badly, when he was with this girl who had the same-sex attraction, his second wife, him and her were not allowed to participate in the 2x2 meetings. They had to just sit there, and they were being ostracized and shunned by the rest of the 2x2 community. In fact, like potlucks and stuff, they'd never get invited, that kind of thing. I mean, that's what happens. So imagine this man went from being the grandson of a convention ground owner and groomed to be a minister, always with the overseers, doing everything right, listen to most of their commands, obeying all these things they've got to say to him. And here he's being shunned, right? Through really no fault of his own, is it? He's tried to do everything right, but he's interacted with all these liars, people who live in false lives. So at that point, he decides to quit his job and become a trucker. Now, he had a very good paying, highly technical job, but he's kind of trucker. Now, the thing about being a trucker and being a 2x2 is they're just not compatible, because how can you go to 2x2 meetings frequently? You can't, because you're driving a truck, right? So, and you can't go to the same 2x2 meeting, obviously, because you're all over the country. So by virtue of him having this trucking job, he essentially wasn't going to meetings for about a year. And during that year, he ended up having a lot of non 2x2 friends from his work and from his prior job and so forth. And in this way, he ended up starting to get involved in their social lives, and they're quite partiers. And he ended up meeting a woman, non 2x2, through this process. And they ended up getting married, and they had a son together. And but this woman was she was into alcohol and drugs and partying pretty heavy, and she was pretty violent with the kid. So he ended up having to divorce her because it was not safe for the child. So again, that's wedding number 3 gone up in smoke. So he had another woman he met, again through the same, through employment and so forth. She also turned out to be violent and got with the partying and stuff. I mean, point out now because he really doesn't know how to select relationships very well because of his awful experience with 2x2s, and he's got this. He's ended up picking up these really pretty damaged women, right? Some of these women had been raped. One woman he ended up marrying, she had been raped by a coworker and had a child by him, and he kind of took her in and got married to her, and she turned out to be super violent. Right? He had another case. Another woman he got married to was it was a co-worker, and she was very young, actually, and got pregnant when she was in high school, and she was a teenage mom, and well, he had this son from this other woman, so they got married, and they had 2 children together, and everything seemed to be going okay. And he had a dream one night. He heard God's audible voice say, "Your children are your charge," and that kind of jolted him that he'd better, get these kids into a church environment. So, of course, the only church he knows is 2x2. So he brings himself, his there's 4 kids between him and this other woman, his wife, and his this wife, who was, of course, has no experience, no exposure to 2x2s ever before. He starts bringing them to 2x2 meetings, and of course, what happens? Well, they're not allowed to do or say anything. They have to just sit there like stumps, right? Well, that's pretty awful. So that didn't last too long, and then he um ended up actually this marriage didn't turn out very well either. This woman actually got interested in another man, so they got a divorce there. So, but this poor man that we're talking about, by now he's had 6 wives, and he's had a lot of hardship through that. And there's depression, there's anger, a lot of anger management courses he ends up taking. It's a serious toll on him, personally, emotionally, financially. It's a toll it takes on his children. And where's all this come from? Well, it comes from his 2x2 childhood and experience, right? I mean, it's an atrocious childhood he had, and it's a childhood that's very common with 2x2s. But yet he's able to come out of it. This is the most interesting thing about this particular case, is that through some therapy, with group therapy, one-on-one therapy, therapy books, he's able to change. And he ends up meeting another woman who is a Christian. He spends about 4 or 5 years getting to know her, and finally they get married and have had a lovely marriage ever after. It's been on for a long time. And this is a particular case of a man whose life was a complete roller coaster because of this craziness in his childhood, which is directly the fault of two by twos and two by two system, and but yet he could have given up, right? He could have given up like many other cases we've known who suicide or OD on drugs or whatever, or go into the ditch. He persevered. He persevered, and he got himself right at his ship, and now he's a man who has an enormous amount of compassion and empathy for these people who have suffered such a things as similar to what he suffered. You know, he's a man of authenticity. He's not a man living a life of lies, like all the people he encountered in his early childhood and adulthood. He's a man of authenticity and perseverance. These are great virtues. I think this particular case is a wonderful example of what could happen if you can get yourself sorted out. But the trouble is, you don't want to take so long to get sorted out. You know, things can go bad. You want to get sorted out quickly. And so part of the point of this podcast is to try to help people who are in two by twos or just coming out of it to get some help. Get yourself sorted out as quickly as possible, because you don't want to go into the ditch. Because in the ditch, the probabilities of getting killed in a ditch is pretty high. I mean, this man came out of the ditch, but he was rolling around in the mud for quite a while, you know. So I hope that's inspiring to someone.